The running quarterback paradox. Let's film study. Okay, here it is. Chiefs Bills AFC Championship game. We have 3rd down and 3, and we're gonna see something here that is pretty unique, and it's something that you only see with teams that have good running quarterbacks. But it's a bit of a paradox. We're going to see why an 8-man box all of a sudden, with no backs in the backfield, becomes 0 backs, 2 gaps, as opposed to 1 back, 1 gap, 2 backs, 2 gaps. Now we're going to see something that's a little different. All right, so it's 11 personnel. We got a running back right here. We have a tight end down here, so it's 11. And our formation from a defensive perspective is cut on 2. So this is cut on 2 here, and then cut 2 at the top, or 2 cut at the top. So this is cut on 22 cut. Cut on 22 cut. Our backfield is gun, and we have our back offset to the tight end, so this is gun near. All right. Now the Chiefs are in an 8-man box, meaning that they are either in cover 3 or cover 1. In this case, we're in man coverage, cover 1. All right. All right. So from this angle, first thing I want to point out is this is pretty smart by Tranquil. So this is an under front, all right, meaning that our 3 technique is away from the tight end. Here's our 3 technique here. This is Chris Jones. He's away from the tight end, meaning that this is an under front. All right. So we got our 2 technique, or our nose guard or our shade here. All right. And what's going to happen here is, if Tranquil doesn't talk to Karlaftis here and say, hey, I need you to bump inside, then we've got what's called a bubble here, and that's not good. We never want an uncovered lineman that can just roll off on a linebacker because that's a tall order for a linebacker. All right, so Tranquil's going to go over here. You're going to see he's going to talk to Karlaftis and say, hey, scoot down. I want you to play a 7 technique instead of out there in a 9 technique so that you can occupy some of this gap for me. So he's going to end up taking this C gap here in between the tight end and tackle, and then Tranquil can just focus on that on that B gap there that's left over. All right. Otherwise, Tranquil has 2 gaps right next to each other, and that's pretty much impossible for a linebacker to cover. So he tells Karlaftis to move now. Now we have an 8-man box, so we've got 1 back in the backfield, so that means 1 back, 1 gap, right? So here are the gaps that we would have in the event of a running back run. All right. Now, what's going to happen is you can see Justin Reed here. He's kind of out of the screen, but you can see he's the forced player out here in the D gap outside the tight end. All right. So what's going to happen is we're going to get motion out of the backfield. So there it goes. Josh Allen is setting the running back in motion. Now, what just happened on the perimeter out here is now Reed had to move outside of the lone receiver that was here. Okay, because the corner has to slough off now and take that running back man to man. All right. So when he does that, we lose our D gap player. Right. When Justin Reed bumps out with that motion, we lose our D gap player now because he is now effectively an E gap player. All right. So what that means is, as soon as he does that, now what used to be our only gaps, if the quarterback were to run the ball, we've got a problem, right? So in this case, if Allen goes to the left, to our defense's left here, right? Well, someone has to cover this D gap out here. So that would be Tranquil. So Tranquil would actually end up having to be in this D gap, which would move Bolton now all the way over to the B gap that Tranquil had. Okay. And if Tranquil has that B gap, then someone has to have this A gap, but there's no one in sight. Well, that's going to have to come from Cook. All right. So when a quarterback is in play for a run, then the free safety, who normally shouldn't have a run fit, now has a responsibility on the run. So he would have to play that gap. Okay. So all of a sudden we go from 1 back, 1 gap to no backs, 2 gaps. And that's a new thing, right? All right. But that's the dilemma that you face when you play a running quarterback. So in this case, Allen's actually going to go to the defense's right, so we don't have to worry about these gaps. All right. But that D gap is still exposed. So now Cook has to be the D gap player way back here. Now the reason he plays D gap if he goes to the right and and A gap if he goes to the left is because he's going to be the late one to the box, right? So he's always going to be on the backside of the flow. So like I said, if Allen goes to the left, he'll play the backside open gap, which would be this A gap where Bolton is. All right. But if the quarterback goes to the right, as he's heading back to his post, he'd have to come down and play this D gap again, away from the flow. Make sense? All right. So now we're going to let this play run. All right. Allen goes to the right, so we can all just go to our right gaps. Now, Allen is reading this defensive end. All right, you can see out here he's reading 90. All right, you can see how he's eyeballing him. As soon as 90 shows out here, he knows he doesn't have that gap. Right, Chris Jones is in the B gap, so he doesn't have that gap either. And Bolton has a pretty good shot at this A gap, so he probably doesn't have that gap either. Okay, so now we've got our 2 technique is in this A gap, so he's going to wind it all the way back to this B gap here. Here. All right, now that's Tranquil's gap. All right, but that's a tough spot for a linebacker to be in with flow away. He's got to somehow force his way into this gap, or like what Tranquil's going to do here is he's going to try to use the guard's body to cover that. I mean, the tackle's body to cover that gap. All right, and he does a really good job of it. But if you look closely, that gap is actually available still. Right through there, that gap is available. Right? So Tranquil does a good job of shoving 79 into the gap to close it down somewhat. But if Allen was maybe a little quicker or a little bit more of a true ball carrier, then he might have found this little gash right there, and we would have some trouble. Right? But Karlaftis does such a good job here of flattening out when he gets tackle away, he just flattens down the line, and he's able to actually cancel that backside B gap just by chasing it down from behind. Okay, so in this case, Karlaftis is our hero. And we get 4th down, and I believe we're off the field after that. There you go. So just when you thought you had it all figured out, we go from 2 backs, 2 gaps, to 1 back, 1 gap, to no backs, 2 gaps. So as you can see, a running quarterback really complicates things. Until next time.